They say you can see a person's soul in their eyes. I used to believe that. I used to think that when I looked at my wife, I could see every emotion flicker through her gaze, the love, the trust, the quiet moments we had built together. But that night, under the dim glow of the restaurant's patio lights, something was different. Her eyes weren't the same. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way they darted around, searching, almost anxious. Or maybe it was the way they softened when she smiled at him. Some guy I didn't even know. A stranger. A man who wasn't me. I wasn't supposed to be there. She had told me she had a late dinner with coworkers, a casual get-together. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. But something inside me, something instinctual, something primal, had told me to check. So I did. I sat in my car across the street, my heartbeat thudding in my ears as I watched them through the glass. She was laughing. Not the forced, polite laugh she gave our neighbors when they made awkward jokes, but the kind of laugh that started deep in the chest and spread across the whole face. The kind of laugh she used to give me. Then I saw it. His hand brushed against hers. It was subtle, almost nothing, but I saw the way she leaned in, just slightly. It was like watching a movie scene I didn't belong in, two people lost in their own little world. I reached for my phone. My fingers felt stiff, robotic. I wasn't even sure what I was doing. Proof? Maybe. A desperate attempt to make this real? Probably. I lifted the camera, my breath caught in my throat. Then her eyes found mine. For a moment, the world stopped. The conversation at her table didn't exist. The cars passing by didn't matter. It was just us, frozen in time, across the street from each other, and I saw it. Guilt. Pure, raw, undeniable guilt. She stood up so fast that her chair wobbled. The man looked confused, following her gaze to where I sat in my car. She turned to him, said something quickly, then rushed outside. I barely had time to react before she opened the passenger door and slipped inside, shutting it behind her. Her perfume filled the air between us. The same scent I had always loved, now suffocating. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Let's go home. Let's talk." She didn't deny anything. She didn't even ask why I was there. I stared ahead, my hands tightening around the steering wheel, my mind racing in 1,000 directions at once. The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, had just confirmed the one thing I never wanted to believe. And I had no idea what to do next. I don't remember putting the car in drive. I don't remember pulling away from the restaurant, or even merging onto the road. All I remember was the silence. Emily, my wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't even trying to explain herself. She just sat there, breathing unevenly, staring straight ahead like she didn't recognize the man beside her. Or maybe she was afraid to look at me. The tension in the car was unbearable. It wasn't like the kind of silence we shared after a long day, the kind that felt comfortable, effortless. No, this was something different. This was the kind of silence that swallowed everything whole, that made every second stretch on endlessly. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, spiraling, replaying everything I had just seen over and over again. The way she had laughed with him. The way her eyes had softened. The way she had panicked when she saw me. The way she didn't deny it. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand the truth, to make her say the words out loud so I wouldn't have to keep guessing. But my throat was tight, and my jaw ached from clenching it shut. So I drove. The streetlights flickered past in a blur, casting long shadows across the dashboard. The sound of the tires humming against the road was the only thing breaking the deafening quiet between us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is he?" My voice came out lower than I expected, steady, but cold. Emily flinched at the sound of it, like she hadn't expected me to speak. For a moment, she just sat there, her lips pressed together. Then, finally, she exhaled shakily. "A coworker," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "It's complicated. Complicated." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Right. Of course it is." She turned toward me then, her expression desperate, pleading. "Mason, please. It's not what you think." I shot her a sharp glance. "Then tell me what it is." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't have an answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. I pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine. The house loomed in front of us, dark and quiet. The place where we had spent years building our lives together. a place that now felt unfamiliar. Emily shifted uncomfortably beside me. Let's go inside. Please. Let's just talk. I turned to her, studying her face. The woman I had married. The woman I had trusted. And yet, in that moment, she felt like a stranger. Without a word, I stepped out of the car. She followed me up the steps, her footsteps hesitant. I unlocked the door, but before I could step inside, she reached for my hand. The touch sent a jolt through me, but not in the way it used to. Once upon a time, her touch had been comforting, grounding. Now, it just felt wrong. Mason, she whispered, her voice trembling. I love you. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I believed her. I let go of her hand, and then I stepped inside, leaving her standing in the doorway. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt heavier, like the house itself knew what had just happened. The walls that had once held our laughter, our late-night talks, and quiet Sunday mornings now felt suffocating, filled with something I didn't know how to name. Emily followed me inside hesitantly, as if she was afraid I'd slam the door in her face. I didn't. I didn't have the energy for dramatics. I just stood there, staring at the dark living room, my thoughts colliding in my head like a storm. Can we? She started, her voice uncertain. I turned to her. She looked small, her shoulders hunched, her fingers twisting in front of her like she was trying to hold herself together. But I wasn't ready to listen to whatever excuse she had prepared. Sit, I said, pointing to the couch. She blinked, startled, but obeyed. I didn't sit with her. I stood across from her, arms crossed, every muscle in my body tense. Talk, I said. Emily swallowed hard. Mason, I. Start from the beginning, I interrupted. Tell me everything. No half-truths. No dodging. And if you lie to me, even once, I swear I'll walk out that door and never look back. She inhaled sharply, nodding. And then she spoke. It started a few months ago, she admitted. At first, it was nothing. Just work talk. Small conversations after meetings. Harmless. My stomach twisted. I didn't say anything. She continued, staring at the floor. Then he started texting me. It was friendly, Mason. I swear. Just jokes, memes, complaining about work. I didn't think anything of it. I let out a slow breath, gripping the back of the chair in front of me. But her lower lip trembled. But I started looking forward to it. That was the first knife to the chest. She wiped at her eyes, sniffling. I didn't mean for it to happen. I wasn't looking for anything outside of us. But I don't know. It was exciting. New. He made me feel. Don't. I cut in sharply. Don't say he made you feel something I didn't. Silence. A long, heavy silence. I never slept with him, she whispered. I felt my jaw tighten. Do you expect me to believe that? Her eyes snapped up, wide with desperation. I swear, Mason. I never did. We flirted, we texted, we met for drinks a couple of times, but I never. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. You kissed him. She flinched. You touched him. Her breath hitched. I stepped closer, my voice steady but cold. You looked at him the way you used to look at me. Tears spilled over her cheeks. It wasn't real. It was a mistake. I was caught up in something stupid, and I didn't think you'd catch you. I finished for her. She let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. I should have felt satisfaction, seeing her break down. But I didn't. I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. I stared at her, this woman I had built a life with, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. I didn't recognize her anymore. And worse, I didn't know if I even wanted to. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. I need time. Emily's head snapped up. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving her sitting there in the darkness, her sobs the only sound filling the space between us. As I climbed the steps, my heart pounded in my chest. Something was broken, and I wasn't sure if it could be fixed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Emily and that man, laughing together, sharing secret glances, leaning toward each other like they had something real, something that had nothing to do with me. The betrayal felt like a living thing inside my chest, clawing at me, twisting every memory we had built together into something ugly. Downstairs, I could hear Emily moving around. The quiet creak of the floorboards, the sound of a glass being set down on the counter, the occasional muffled sob. I knew she was awake, just like me. I knew she was probably waiting for me to come down, to talk, to tell her what came next. But I had nothing to say. Eventually, the sky outside started to lighten, soft rays of early morning creeping in through the blinds. I sat up, rubbing my face with both hands, trying to shake off the exhaustion. But no amount of sleep, if I had even managed any, would change what had happened. I had to face her. When I finally stepped out of the bedroom, Emily was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. She looked up the moment she heard my footsteps. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face pale. She had been crying all night. "Mason," she said softly, as if afraid speaking too loudly would shatter what little control I had left. "Can we talk?" I finished for her, my voice hoarse. She nodded. I ran a hand through my hair, sighing. "I don't even know where to start." Emily swallowed hard, pulling the blanket tighter around herself like it could shield her from the mess she had created. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear to you, Mason, I didn't think." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's the problem, isn't it? You didn't think. You just did. You risked everything for what? Some excitement? A few stolen moments." Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't done. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice growing sharper, more raw. "I trusted you. I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid. And all this time, you were sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face." Emily flinched like I had slapped her. "I wasn't." "Don't." I cut her off. "Don't insult me by pretending you weren't lying." She closed her mouth, her whole body trembling. I exhaled slowly, trying to rein in my emotions before I lost control completely. "I need to know why, Emily. I need to understand what the hell happened to us." She let out a shaky breath, wiping at her tears. "I don't know," she admitted. "I got caught up in something that wasn't real. It felt different, like I was someone else for a little while. Like I wasn't just my wife." I asked coldly. She nodded, ashamed. I looked away, my jaw clenching. "So what happens now?" Emily opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to find an answer. "I don't want to lose you," she finally whispered. "I love you, Mason. I know I messed up, but I can fix this. We can fix this." I stared at her, searching for something in her eyes. Remorse, desperation, love. I found all three, but I also saw fear. Fear that she had lost me already. And the terrifying part? She might have been right. Emily's words hung in the air between us, fragile and desperate. "I love you, Mason. I know I messed up, but I can fix this. We can fix this." Could we? I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love was enough to patch up what she had shattered. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the image of her sitting with that man, laughing, leaning in, touching him, choosing him, played over and over in my mind like a broken film reel. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling. Emily shifted, wiping her eyes, swallowing hard. "Please say something." I exhaled, pressing my fingers to my temples. "I don't even know what to say, Emily. You want to fix this? Tell me how. Tell me how I'm supposed to wake up tomorrow and pretend this didn't happen. Tell me how I'm supposed to trust you again." She bit her lip, her hands gripping the blanket around her shoulders like it could shield her from my words. She started, but no real answer came. Just silence. That's what I thought. I shook my head, pacing the length of the living room, my thoughts in chaos. "You know what's crazy?" I said, letting out a bitter laugh. "I keep going back over everything, every little moment, trying to see if I missed the signs. And the worst part? I think I did." Emily's eyes widened. "What?" I turned to face her, my voice colder than I intended. "The late nights. The sudden interest in your phone. The way you started pulling away, little by little. It was all right there, wasn't it?" She flinched. "Mason." I let out a humorless chuckle. God, I was so blind. I thought it was just stress. I thought maybe we were in a rough patch, that work was exhausting you, that... I stopped, shaking my head at my own stupidity. "But the truth is, you were already slipping away. And I didn't see it until it was too late." Emily's lip quivered. "That's not true." I met her gaze, my chest aching. "Isn't it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, crossing the room toward me slowly, hesitantly, like she was afraid I'd push her away. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "I need you to believe that." I didn't move, because I didn't know if I believed her anymore. "Then why?" I asked, my voice quieter now, raw. "If you loved me, why did you do it?" Emily let out a shaky breath, her eyes pleading. "I don't have an excuse, Mason. I was selfish. I let myself get caught up in something that didn't matter. And I swear to you, it meant nothing. Didn't look like nothing, I muttered before I could stop myself. Her face crumpled, but I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty for saying it. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. I felt exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. My heart was carrying more weight than it could handle, and I wasn't sure how much more it could take. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spoke. I don't know if I can do this, Emily. The words nearly broke me, but they were the truth. Her breath hitched. Mason, please. I need space. She froze. I turned to face her again, forcing myself to look at her, really look at her. I can't just wake up tomorrow and pretend everything's fine. I can't just go back to normal like you didn't shatter my trust. I need time. And I need space. Emily's hands trembled at her sides. Are you leaving? I hesitated. I hadn't thought that far ahead. But the idea of staying in this house, surrounded by memories that now felt tainted, felt unbearable. I don't know, I admitted honestly. Her face twisted with panic. Please, Mason, don't go. We can fix this, I swear. Just, please don't leave. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Part of me wanted to stay, wanted to hold on to the life we had built, to convince myself that we could get through this. But another part, the part of me that was still bleeding from the wound she had inflicted, knew that if I didn't walk away now, I might never be able to. I exhaled slowly and opened my eyes. I'll be back later, I said. Emily let out a soft, broken sob, but she didn't try to stop me this time. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, stepping into the cold morning air. And as I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, I realized something that made my stomach sink. I didn't know if I would ever come back. I drove for hours. At first, I thought I had a destination in mind, maybe a hotel, maybe my brother's house, but I realized quickly that I wasn't heading anywhere. I just needed to move, to get away from the house, from Emily, from everything that felt suffocating. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, but they clung to me like a storm I couldn't outrun. The moment in the restaurant, the way she laughed with him, the way she panicked when she saw me, the way she tried to spin it into something not real. But it was real. Real enough to make me question everything about our life together. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot outside an all-night diner. I sat there, staring at the neon sign flickering in the dark, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into my bones. I needed air. Stepping out of the car, I leaned against the hood, rubbing a hand over my face. The night was eerily quiet, just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustling of the wind. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I had spent the last decade believing in Emily, trusting her completely. And in one night, all of that was gone. I felt stupid, weak, like a fool who had let himself be played. The worst part? I still loved her. I hated that I did. I hated that even after everything, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe her, that wanted to go back home and let her hold me, to pretend like none of this had happened. But it had, and I couldn't unsee it. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't even hear the approaching footsteps until someone spoke. Rough night? I turned sharply. An older man, maybe in his 60s, stood a few feet away, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He wore a worn-out jacket, his face weathered with time, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp, like he had seen this look on a man's face before. I let out a short, humorless chuckle. Yeah, you could say that. He nodded, stepping closer. Mind if I sit? I hesitated for a second before shrugging. Go ahead. The man perched himself on the curb, sipping his coffee. You look like a man who just had his world flipped upside down. I exhaled slowly. Something like that. He took another sip before saying, Wife. I turned to him, narrowing my eyes slightly. How'd you guess? He chuckled, shaking his head. I've been alive long enough to recognize that look. A man doesn't stare into the night like that unless a woman just ripped his heart out. I didn't answer right away. I just looked out into the distance, my chest tightening. She cheated, I finally admitted, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. The man nodded like he already knew. And you're out here trying to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do next. I swallowed hard. Yeah. A long silence stretched between us. The neon diner sign buzzed faintly, casting a dim glow over the parking lot. Then, the man spoke again. You'll never forget it, he said quietly. No matter what you do. No matter how much time passes. That moment, when you realize she wasn't yours anymore, it'll stay with you. My stomach clenched. So what do I do? He sighed, swirling his coffee in the cup. That's the thing, son. No one can tell you that. Some men stay. Some men leave. Some try to make it work. Some spend years regretting it. He looked at me then, his eyes piercing. But whatever you do, you gotta ask yourself, do you really believe she's still your wife? Or is she just the woman you used to love? The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. The woman I had built a life with wasn't the same woman I had seen at that restaurant. And I didn't know if I could ever love her the same way again. The man finished his coffee, letting out a satisfied sigh before standing up. Whatever you decide, just make sure you do it for you. Not for her. Not for memories. For you. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. He gave me one last pat on the shoulder before walking toward the diner, disappearing inside. I sat there for a long time, staring at the ground, my mind racing. Then, finally, I pulled out my phone. There was a single message from Emily. Please come home. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Then, I turned off my phone, climbed back into my car, and drove away. Not toward home. Not toward Emily. Just away. For the first time in years, I needed to figure out who I was without her. The road stretched ahead of me, endless and empty. Streetlights flickered past, casting long shadows across the pavement. I had no idea where I was going, but for the first time in years, I was moving without thinking about anyone else. No calls to check in. No texts to let Emily know when I'd be home. No expectations, no obligations. Just me, the road, and the deafening silence of my own thoughts. I kept driving until the neon glow of a cheap roadside motel caught my eye. It was the kind of place people passed without noticing, tucked between a gas station and a 24-hour diner. The parking lot was half empty, just a few trucks and beat-up sedans scattered near the entrance. I pulled in, shut off the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked different. Hollow. Like something inside me had been drained. I stepped out of the car, stretching my stiff muscles before heading inside. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and industrial-grade cleaner. A tired-looking woman behind the front desk barely glanced up as she slid over a registration form. One night, she asked, her voice monotone. I hesitated. 2. Maybe more. She nodded, taking my cash and handing me a key without another word. I walked to my room, the hallway dimly lit by flickering bulbs. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a room that looked exactly how I expected. Outdated furniture, a bed that had seen better days, and a tiny TV bolted to the wall. I dropped my bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my hands over my face. What the hell was I doing? Running? Escaping? Trying to delay the inevitable? I pulled out my phone. One missed call from Emily. Another message. Please, Mason. Just tell me where you are. We need to talk. I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the nightstand. I wasn't ready to talk. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of cars passing on the highway. My mind drifted back to the night before, to the moment I saw her with him. It played in my head like a slow-motion nightmare. The way she smiled at him. The way she leaned in. The way she chose to share a part of herself with someone else, something that had once belonged to me. And now, what did I have left? A house that no longer felt like home. A marriage that had been built on a lie? I had spent years believing in Emily, trusting her without question. And in return, she had given her attention, her energy, her heart to another man. Maybe not fully. Maybe not completely. But enough. Enough to make me feel like a stranger in my own life. I let out a slow breath, closing my eyes. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to come home, to sit across from her and let her explain, to have the long, painful conversation where she'd try to convince me that we could fix this. But could we? Could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I ever trust her again? Or was I just clinging to something that had already died? I didn't know how long I lay there, staring at nothing, my thoughts spiraling. At some point, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a restless sleep. A loud knock jolted me awake. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was dim, the only light coming from the flickering motel sign outside the window. Another knock. More insistent this time. I swung my legs off the bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Who the hell? Then, a voice. Mason, please open the door. Emily. My breath caught in my throat. How did she find me? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to pretend I wasn't here. But another part, the part that still remembered the life we had built together, needed to see her. Needed to hear what she had to say. I exhaled and opened the door. Emily stood there, wrapped in a coat, her face pale and tired. She looked different, smaller, fragile, like the weight of what she had done was finally crushing her. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Desperation? Regret? She stepped forward, but I didn't move. "Mason," she whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I swallowed hard, gripping the doorframe to steady myself. I should tell her to leave. I should turn my back and walk away. But instead, I said the one thing I wasn't sure I believed anymore. "Come inside." Emily stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the dim motel room as if she expected to see something that would confirm her worst fears, that she had lost me forever. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, watching her. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her coat was still buttoned up to her neck, like she had rushed out the door the moment she decided to find me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and turned to face me fully. "I thought I lost you," she admitted, her voice raw. I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. "You almost did." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I know." More silence. Heavy, suffocating. Then, she took a slow step closer, her hands clasped together like she was trying to hold herself together. "Mason, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. I know I hurt you in a way that I can't take back, and I don't have an excuse for it." I stayed quiet, waiting. She inhaled sharply. "But I need you to know that losing you, truly losing you, made me realize something. I don't care about excitement, or attention, or anything else. I care about you. And if there's even the slightest chance that you can still love me after this, I will do whatever it takes to prove myself to you again." Her voice cracked at the end, her eyes filling with tears. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. I had spent the last few days drowning in the pain of her betrayal, in the anger, in the heartbreak. But somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the storm of emotions that had consumed me since that night at the restaurant, I found something unexpected. Hope. Because despite everything, despite the lies, despite the betrayal, I did still love her. And maybe, just maybe, love was worth fighting for. I exhaled slowly, stepping away from the door. "This won't be easy," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and forget what happened. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight." "I know," she whispered. I took another step closer. "But if you're really willing to fight for this, then so am I." Emily let out a small, broken sob, this time, not from pain, but from relief. I reached for her hand, hesitating for just a moment before lacing my fingers with hers. For the first time in days, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. This wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning, and that was enough.